Hello, my name is Ryan Mock, and my presentation today is going to talk about the effects of inconsistent communication, specifically in higher education. So, a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. I'd like to start with a little bit of an introduction. So, I work out of SVSU's admissions office, and we are constantly working collaboratively with other offices across the institution to market SVSU to prospective students, prospective families, parents, high school counselors, and again, really just trying to advertise the university. So we really work really tightly with university communications. They do a lot of the marketing materials and outreach for students on that front, where the admissions office is more seen as kind of that front-facing, front lines type of involvement there. It's really important to make sure when we're reaching out to students, whether that's from the admissions office to the housing office to orientation or financial aid, that we are creating consistent messaging campaigns that are working collaboratively between those offices to make sure that students are getting consistent messaging throughout their experience with SVSU. So this really becomes important when we are sending text campaigns to students, when we're sending email campaigns out to students, and that they aren't being promised something that isn't, again, provided consistently across the board from office to office. So really just trying to create that consistent messaging collaboratively between offices can help us create that consistent message that can limit confusion, limit discrepancies between each individual student experience on campus. So starting really with why consistent messaging matters, it really just starts to build that trust and transparency with students, prospective students, and families. When they come to SVSU, when they come onto campus, they have an idea of what their experience is going to be like, likely based off of conversations they've had in the past with our admissions office, family, friends who maybe went to SVSU, and kind of that word of mouth type of experience that they may have gathered throughout their high school career so far. So when we're, having those messaging campaigns going out to students, we are hopeful that those are consistent with what they've heard about the university as well. And that would be that we are a transparent university, an affordable university, a campus where students can come and feel that sense of belonging, and that they will be helped throughout their entire experience here at SVSU. In order for that to be communicated to students, we need to make sure that there are reliable chains to do so. And that's really from the staff at SVSU, student workers at SVSU, just again, making sure that those students are getting that consistent messaging day after day, kind of repeating that repetition for students, hammering it in that they will have a consistent experience at SVSU. Likewise, we also want to make sure that those goals and missions are aligning from office to office. We want to make sure that different offices aren't pushing specific agendas, individual agendas, that we are really collaboratively working towards those goals and missions of the institution. And also streamlining that process as simply as possible. I think this is probably the number one challenge that we would face as an office, is really trying to make sure that every single system we have in place for SVSU students and those prospective students coming in is as easy to follow and as streamlined as possible. The reality is some of these students are first gen college students. Maybe they've never done something like this before. Maybe their parents don't have any ideas of quite what an experience like this looks like. Making sure that, again, that process is as easy to understand and that there are resources available. But really that consistent messaging piece is really important for those families, just so we don't lose those students potentially through the cracks. So again, consistency really is key when it comes to those messaging campaigns to students and families. So what can cause some inconsistent messages here? So when we look at a slide like this, really those individual goals that we mentioned, specific offices are doing outreach to students, basically to fulfill what they might need as an office. So again, housing is probably reaching out to students to make sure that the students are aware of what housing looks like. Financial aid and scholarships, maybe sending notifications out to students when they receive a financial aid letter. Our office is really kind of that glue, that connecting piece that typically is reaching out to students about each of those individual pieces as well. We really want to make sure, again, that those consistent messages are coming from that collaborative process, making sure that we are working together as an office to make sure that those messaging campaigns are consistent from office to office. Another thing that can cause some inconsistent messaging would be separate team ideologies. Maybe they have different things that they think are important for students and families to hear. So those differentiated pieces offices can cause some inconsistent messaging if they think something is really important and then another office never really talks about those types of things. Again, that can create a little bit of confusion for the students and families as well. Potentially lack of awareness. This can be an issue that if other offices don't know that you're reaching out to students about their specific office needs, that could create some inconsistent messaging. Different priorities. Again, this kind of leads into a couple of other things we've talked about, but students may have different needs and may reach out to different offices for those needs. And we want to make sure that they aren't being bounced around, that those priorities are getting handled by the offices that should be handling those, that are handling those things on a day-to-day basis. And then lastly, that there's no strategy in place to work collaboratively, that we just kind of wing it as we go, or we work with offices as needed. There needs to be some sort of approach, again, to have that collaborative strategy in place. We don't want there to be inconsistent messaging because there is not a collaborative effort across the board. So what can be some challenges when we look at inconsistent messaging? And I really like to pull up the picture on the right side of this page here, talking a little bit about the complex nature of workplace communication alone, and then kind of using that to talk about how that would flow from a staff to a student as well. So just within the workplace alone, talking with some of our staff members, our colleagues, people that we work with on a day-to-day basis, just in those conversations, there can be a lot of misunderstandings. We may need some additional clarity on specific topics. Some staff or colleagues may have an expertise in a specific area where somebody else may have that expertise in a separate area. So those can be really difficult. They may not have the knowledge base or attention span either for something like that. And then even cultural differences can come into play among a staff if they are a diverse campus staff. So when we look at those 4 to 5 different challenges there, imagine how that can come from a staff. If there's inconsistent messaging from the staff perspective, how that can kind of overflow into the student experience as well. So when we look at that possibility, that could really create kind of that inconsistent communication or inconsistent messaging throughout the entire institution. So really ensuring that we do have open communication chains available, that we provide those feedback opportunities for campus staff as well as even students to provide some staff on how their virtual appointments went, how high school visits or campus events might have gone. Those can kind of help us narrow in on some of those opportunities to improve on our communication. Ineffective collaborative efforts. So if staff are not necessarily thrilled about working from office to office, this can kind of cause some of those challenges that we might face where they don't want to be collaborative in any sense, working with students or families. That can be really challenging as well. And then that can also create a very negative communication climate. So when we look at something like that, if we're interacting from office to office and there's not a positive experience with that, we will likely not go back to that office for any needs. We may not send students to those specific offices for questions that may need some of those answered. That can really cause some inconsistent messaging from staff to staff. And then the last couple of pieces there, some challenges tied to inconsistent messaging really come back to mixed messaging. Students may not be getting a consistent message from office to office if they are not, again, working collaboratively there and interacting between teams. And it can also create some spam messaging opportunities. So if a student has heard from the admissions office 3 to 4 times on housing, they've heard from the housing office 3 to 4 times about housing, again, that can start to really pile up on the student. That can maybe turn some students off to the university if they feel like they're getting spammed. They may opt out for like texting or email campaigns. And that can really impact our ability, again, to reach out to students. So just ensuring that we aren't spamming students with messaging, but giving them that consistent messaging, whether that happens bi-weekly, whether that happens monthly, whatever the offices decide works for them. Just keeping that consistent and notifying other offices what's being sent out is really important to limiting some of these challenges here. So when we figure it all out, benefits of consistent messaging are numerous. There are so many opportunities that you can use really consistent, excellent messaging throughout different offices to ensure that students are getting the exact information that they may need. So when we look on the right side here, a graphic that really talks about one of the main messaging forms that we use, and I know other offices around the institution use for outreach for students, and that would be text messaging. So when we have effective communication, effective messaging strategies in place, that can really help when it comes to these text messaging campaigns to students. We're able to build relationships with students throughout these experiences. We're also able to personalize those text messages. So if there are specifics that we may need from a student, it's really nice to have those types of collaborative approaches in place so that we can really personalize those outreach efforts for students. Um, Time reminders, the nice thing about our CRM system, we'll talk a little bit about this in the next couple of slides, but when you have effective communication methods, different chains that you can use to utilize some effective communication, you can set up like notification reminders, you can set up weekly reminders. It's really nice to be able to kind of also personalize those text messaging reminders to really help enhance engagement for students, really just get them comfortable with communicating with the staff at SVSU. So that can really, again, help improve a student's understanding of the university. It can help them feel comfortable getting some of those questions answered. And again, repeating this information as much as possible to students without spamming them, but making sure they are getting that repetition. Again, so we are at the forefront thinking about some of the things that they may need to handle at the institution, but they're not getting that mixed messaging from different offices and that inconsistent messaging. So it's really important to make sure that you and that we are working together to make sure that we're having this be something that's effective for students. It also outlines clear opportunities for students to have expectations so they can see exactly what they might need to do. And then likewise for the staff as well with collaboration efforts, it really just helps have a set foundation for how this works. How is the messaging campaign going to go? When we have that consistent messaging, we know what to expect. We have kind of that norm that we would develop as offices. So it really helps with that sense of, again, kind of that normalcy and just making sure that we have those clear expectations from office to office. And then again, it increases engagement between not only staff and colleagues here at the institution, but also between students and faculty. That's really something that we want to encourage students, is to be as comfortable with the staff and the colleagues that they might be interacting with here at the institution as well. So this is a complicated process. Communication is not easy. What are some strategies, some really simple strategies that can be in place? And we'll kind of talk about these on the next couple of slides here, but really having centralized messaging for students. So really just basic understandings of exactly the things that they might need to do. And that centralized messaging should be consistent from office to office. We talked a little bit about this, but allowing feedback for students and families. So again, if they attend one of our events, sending out a link to fill out a feedback form where they can select how effective was your day? Did you feel like you got all of your questions answered? What were some areas you were hoping to have a little bit more information provided? We really can kind of connect those dots, get that feedback from prospective students and families, and utilize those in years to come as well. And then another strategy would be just team reflection, working together with teams. And that's really nice about today's day and age with being such a digital world. We can meet virtually if we need to do Teams meetings, if we need to do Zoom meetings, if we want to meet in person and just reflect on our communication or marketing materials, whatever that may be. Just making sure that we are happy with what we have in place and that we feel like this is, again, putting that student need first, making sure that all of those students are getting exactly what they need from our materials and our messaging campaigns as well. So some recommendations for consistent messaging here, a collaborative task force. So this is something we really have utilized in the past couple of years with FAFSA delays and the switching of FAFSA. This has been a little bit of a confusing process for students. So this is something that we found very effective for our office, is creating a task force which has representatives from different offices who can come and kind of represent what their office is about. And so if they have specific needs, if they have specific priorities, they can really come together from, again, each representative from those offices and work collaboratively to address any needs that we might have as the institution as a whole. An overlapping CRM system. This is something I cannot stress enough. So here at SVSU, we utilize Slate. Slate is a CRM system that is essential for emailing students, pulling queries where we can see reports of students who have applied to the institution, if they've filled out their FAFSA, if they've filled out the housing contract. You really can see everything about a student portal within that CRM system. This is very, very useful when interacting and collaborating with other offices because, again, we don't necessarily need to say anything. You can collaboratively work within that student profile. You can see everything that you might need. The timeline shows interactions from every single office here at the university. So if they've interacted with any other office, that CRM system has that timeline where you can go and kind of pull that data and utilize it as you might need. So when you have that overlapping CRM system, it makes it really easy for offices to collaborate. You don't necessarily have to set up, as we'll talk in the next one, strategic planning sessions, which I do think are important, but there are other ways around uh, doing so and can be more time effective as well, where again, you don't need to set up a meeting. You don't need to have to really worry about developing a task force. Everything can be provided within that one CRM system. So very, very important here. And then I do talk about strategic planning and how those sessions can be very important, which at these sessions, teams should talk about what they plan to do over the next year. How can we assist your office better in the next academic year? Having those conversations, being able to develop what that plan might look like from office to office and how a collaborative plan, an overarching plan, kind of that umbrella type of plan for the entire institution, kind of how we can fulfill those further needs that kind of trickle down a little bit there. So a theoretical concept that I found that's really beneficial to kind of understanding how complicated of a process communication can be. And when we throw in the digital world as well in communicating with students and colleagues, it becomes a very complicated process. Um, and so when we look at something like this, we really look at kind of that very basic need of eliminating noise where we possibly can. Any unnecessary noise, outside noise that we can eliminate to streamline this communication process becomes really important, and really making this a basic type of process where it's coming from a specific source and how we can get that to the receiver in as efficiently as possible when it comes to communicating there. I think some limitations here is it really kind of only provides some feedback from the receiver to the sender. It can be a little bit complicated to kind of get feedback on that entire process. And I also think there's some limitations here when it comes to the dynamic nature of conversation. This doesn't account for all of the, he said, she said, kind of that process of how communication trickles out. And again, if this is connecting to different offices, it kind of starts the process over. So that new receiver would flow back in. They could become a sender and develop that out to other offices or other students as well. So it really just kind of repeats itself as a cycle, which I think really does a good job of highlighting kind of how the communication might go within a higher ed setting. So some of my references used throughout to just back some of the graphics that I pulled. And then likewise, some of the academic sources that I used for some of my research throughout this PowerPoint. Lastly, my name again is Ryan Mock. If you have some questions, my email there is rlmock@svsu.edu, and then our Go site as well, which has a lot of really great resources if you have some questions for me in the future. So thank you.